I'm Chalon Rubina, LCSW. I have a private practice in Pasadena. I see people in person and online. Um, I really kind of specialize in divorce, discernment, deciding whether to get divorced or not, and then supporting individuals through divorce and then putting your life back together after divorce. But what I've discovered is I see a lot of people with borderline personality disorder. Um, Over a third of my caseload at this point is borderline personality disorder. They seem to stick with me, and I actually enjoy working with them. It's challenging, but in a way that I kind of like. So, yeah. Um, so we might as well start since the thing is here.
Thank you, Jim.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Working on it.
So Jill have to let Jim know when to advance the slides.
Go ahead and do the next slide. So,
Wow.
fear of abandonment is what runs borderline personality disorder. Everything that they do is all about fear of abandonment. And they're not aware that that's what's going on, but all of the behavior can be traced back to fear of abandonment. So you can go to the next slide. Um, so the DSM gives a bunch of criteria, but it's really hard to know how that looks when you actually are seeing someone with borderline personality disorder. Um, there's some odd hints that I've discovered. First off, let's go to the next slide. So we'll go over these, which are pretty basic, but there's some other things that show up that most clinicians aren't aware of. So all the emotions are big. There's no like, oh, I'm a little upset or I'm annoyed. No, it's I'm furious or I'm so depressed. And they don't have a lot of emotional control. The emotions are all over the place. During a session, we'll go from tears to laughter to like extreme anger, and then back to tears again. It's back and forth all over the place. You also feel a push pull from the client. They want a lot of participation in their emotion from you. Their anger is explosive. Their feelings of depression are frequently they start talking about everyone would be better off without me, or I hate this person, I'm never talking to them again. They feel empty, hopeless, like nothing is ever going to get better. They don't have a really good sense of that things will change, that they're not always going to feel this way, even though like 5 minutes before they felt completely different. Um, they 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 seem to feel like this is how they're going to feel all the time. Um, they don't trust other people. We can go on to the next one. Okay, that's interesting. So the thinking for this is a function of the G. Don't worry about it. It's probably not gonna fix because it's I did it in Keynote and this is PowerPoint. So it's probably a Mac versus, thank you. Very cool. Okay. How they are feeling about someone at this moment 100% dictates how they think about that person, how they believe they've thought about that person forever. Everything is very black and white. I call it Jesus versus Satan. Everyone and everything is either all good or all bad. You're even the therapist. You are Jesus at the moment, but if you push them too hard or you deny what they're saying, frequently, if you question what they're saying, you become Satan. But you can go back and forth from being Jesus to Satan and Jesus to Satan and Jesus to Satan in a single conversation. The people that they're talking about will also go back and forth between Jesus and Satan. It if you're not prepared for it, it's very frustrating. And it feels like they're intentionally being confusing sometimes, but they're not. They're not aware that this is what's happening. Everything is catastrophic. One small setback is the end of the world. I had an argument with my best friend, and we're just never going to speak again. And they're terrible, which now they're Satan. And then you ask a couple of questions about that. I find curiosity is the way to deal with that. So what did they do that's so terrible? Well, they said that I was wrong about whatever. It could be really minor. Like I said that I had cornflakes for breakfast, but I told them that I had cornflakes for breakfast, and they remembered that I had oatmeal for breakfast, and they're just never listening to me. They can't be my friend. So the fact that their friend thought that they had oatmeal for breakfast, or that they accidentally told their friend they had oatmeal for breakfast, and their friend said something about, oh, and the oatmeal you had for breakfast. Now they feel like their friend isn't their friend, and they're being betrayed by them. And what that's really going back to is they feel like if their friend isn't 100% on board with everything that they say, they're going to abandon them. They are always the victims of everything, and that's a really comfortable place for them to be. Other places where I challenge them gently. We'll come back to all of this because it's all tied together. So you can go to the next one. Splitting is a lot of that part about Jesus and Satan. If they feel angry at that friend about the oatmeal thing, they will completely rewrite their memory of this person. This person never pays attention to them, never knows never pays attention to what they say, doesn't care about them at all, and never has, even though this is their best friend that they've spent most of their life with. That's that all or nothing thinking it's very frustrating for the friend who feels like they can't say anything. If they disagree, they're not going to be friends anymore. They don't take responsibility for their actions. They won't acknowledge that they were happy with this friend yesterday because the friend asked about the oatmeal they had yesterday, and they actually had oatmeal yesterday. And then they talked about whatever about the oatmeal. And the friend was on the right page, or maybe their friend was listening to them complain about somebody else in their life, because that's a lot of what happens. They're very concerned about the relationships that they are involved in and where they stand with people in those relationships. The last encounter that they had with that person, with whoever it is how they view them. for a while until new information is presented. Sometimes the new information is a memory that surfaces, or somebody else says something and that changes their mind. Because of that, you end up with a lot of false memories, things that they say that happened that actually didn't happen, because they have to make everything line up. If this person is really Satan, they had to have done crimes, and so they will make up the crimes. They are unaware that that's what's going on. It's part of why it's so difficult to work with them, because you don't really have a good history from them. They are really poor reporters, very poor historians. You'll get over time, if you sit with them long enough, you will get an idea about who people really are, because you'll hear the good parts, and then the next time you'll hear the bad parts, and then the next time you'll hear the good parts. But they're unaware that they're doing this. You can go to the next slide. By the way, if there are questions in the middle, please feel free, because sometimes it's hard to remember them later. So a lot of this is their personality is unstable. You can tell when you've worked with somebody for a while which group of friends they're spending time with based on how they're behaving. They take on the personality traits of the people that they are spending time with. If they're spending time with a friend who is, this one's my current favorite, really conservative, they will come in with all these really conservative views. And then the next week, they'll have spent time with somebody who is very liberal, and they'll come in with all these liberal views. And they won't remember that they had all these really conservative views, or they'll like gloss over it like I misheard it or something like that. They will feel more, they'll feel stronger or more capable if they've been spending time with people who are stronger and capable. If they're spending time with people who have a lot of disordered thinking themselves, they will end up with a lot of disordered thinking about themselves and about the world. It's how they feel about themselves and the world and individuals changes all the time based on who they've spent time with and what thoughts they've had about those people most recently. Okay, you can go to the next slide. One of the things that comes up a lot with working with borderline personality disorder is suicide. They talk about it. They will even do suicidal gestures. Most of the time it's gestures. It's really not real stuff. Or if it kind of is real, and some of it is really dangerous, but a lot of times it's more for attention. My personal favorite is the client who decided that she was going to eat paper bags until she got her way. I don't know, or until she died, either one. That was really bizarre. I also had a client who did much more harmful gestures. She jumped off a one-story bridge. She jumped off a one-story building. She ran her car into a brick wall at 30 miles an hour. She didn't really intend on killing herself, because that's not going to really kill you most likely, but she did lots of damage to herself. And you have to take the suicidal stuff really seriously. Clients will say, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill myself. Or they'll say to their partners, if you leave, I'm going to kill myself. The answer is always to just act like it is 100% true and call 911 or send someone to evaluate in their home. I tell family members that have that going on in their life, they're dealing with somebody with borderline personality disorder, call. The best part about the call is if you actually call, they don't do it again because they're going to end up in the hospital on a 72-hour hold, which frequently how that plays out is they're not kept the whole 72 hours. They usually only get like 24 hours because their behavior clears up immediately when they are in the hospital. Sometimes, most of the time. Go on to the next one. Push pull. They're always pushing you away, and then they want to pull you back in and pushing you away and pulling you back in. And you can feel that in the room happening right up front. I've had clients that fire me at the beginning of the session and then tell me at the end of the session, so we're meeting next week, right? Okay, yeah, we're meeting next week. And that's because we come into the session, they're angry with me for something that happened, or most often it's because they actually made really good progress last session and they're kind of afraid. So they want to fire me. Borderlines always want to have, people with borderline personality disorder always want to have a merged relationship with other people. They want really, really close, no distance, no space between the two people, because that feels the safest. If you're merged, you're not going to be abandoned. And then the classic narcissist borderline relationship, those are really awful and very frustrating as a clinician to deal with, because the on again, off again nature of the relationship. And usually it ends up with the narcissist being so awful, just saying horrible things, having explosions, explosive anger, and abandoning the person with borderline personality disorder, and then coming back. And the person with borderline keeps going back and keeps taking them back and keeps trying to make the relationship work. I think a lot of it is because you get that little bit of really great attention from someone with narcissism when they're trying to suck you in. And that feels so good to the borderline who is just starving for that kind of attention. But then they get discarded, and that triggers all the abandonment. And then you have a session where there's lots of tears and talks of suicide. So let's see, is it fair to say that most or all people with borderline disorder have extremely low ego strength? Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Lots of that. That's why they take on the persona of other people. It's really kind of amazing how much they will take on other people's belief systems as like they're their own. We can go on to the next slide. Dance through the minefield. So this is how I think of treating someone with borderline personality disorder, because everywhere you look, there are landmines. And the goal is to just go through the landmine field without triggering landmines. The next slide. So the key is validation. Lots of validation. Listen to what they say, and not to argue directly with, not to push directly against what they say. If they say, this person is wonderful, even though I know this person is a narcissist and will just discard them tomorrow, I go along with it, but I do push against it. That the whole key is going with what they're saying enough to keep them engaged, to prevent breaching, skating along the edge of the breach, while still pushing them to make changes, to see what non-helpful behavior they're creating for themselves, to challenge their rewriting of history. But I do that with a lot of questions like, oh, I thought you'd said, did I get that wrong? And sometimes, often actually, they will then remember what they said before and then try to reconcile it with the horrible picture they're presenting today, or the fantastic picture they're creating today. Even though it was a horrible picture last time, they start to try to reconcile it. And it's in that trying to make those two things hold together that they actually start to see some of what they're doing. I find that it's not helpful to point it out directly. It's more helpful to ask. Challenging the historical rewriting is really about asking the questions. Oh, I thought you said, well, what did I miss? Stuff like that. It's very soft. It's very slow. I've worked with several of my people for years, and we have made progress, but we're still having a lot of the same splitting behavior. This person is terrible. This situation is terrible. This situation is wonderful. This situation is amazing. Now it's terrible again. Now it's amazing again. But there's, over time, what I see is it gets a little bit easier. Is there more? I think that's the last one. There's a couple of things that you'll feel in the room with them. One of an old professor of mine a long time ago said, in the 80s, they called borderline, they said, coming into a psych hospital, they would say, oh, borderline with teddy bear features, because t-shirts with teddy bears and glitter and stuff were really popular with like teens. If you saw that on somebody who came in their 30s or 40s, chances were really good that that person was a borderline, and they called it borderline with teddy bear features. Now, I've seen that in clients. I had a client come in wearing a sweater that had little bears holding balloons all over it. And I was like, oh, I will bet that this person has borderline personality disorder. And lo and behold, about 5 minutes into the session, it became very obvious that that's what was going on. So it's just something that I notice. If they do a lot of, if they have like little bears attached to their purse, or little stuffed animals that they carry around with them, I do see more women than men. The men tend to be a little harder to work with. So there's a question: realistic expectations and what does progress look like? So progress looks like there's less splitting. The splitting becomes less pronounced. There's more stability in the history. The history starts to become more stable. Some things completely drop out. A client talked about a childhood friend that did sexual abuse, and over time, that childhood friend went back to being Jesus, and the sexual abuse disappeared. And then when I asked about it, she insisted that that never happened. And over time, when I questioned it again, they were like, no, that didn't happen. I remember saying that and it didn't happen. So they start to become more aware of their own behavior. So that looks like progress. Realistic expectations are that they will become more stable, more emotional control, less volatility, less flying off the handle. So paranoid personality with borderline, there's a lot of overlap there, a lot of paranoia from borderline personality disorder. Really with borderline, it's all about abandonment and it's all about relationships. With paranoia, there's other things going on. I haven't had a lot of clients that are paranoid.
Hi,
Hi, how are you?
good. Let me just I'm doing another video. It's nice to see you. I got my
Let's see. So I don't know, did I answer that question? Sorry, the interruption kind of threw me off. Yes, go ahead, Lynn. I don't know how to unmute you.
You're muted, Lynn.
I'm going to answer the question about managing reporting or not reporting claims of child abuse. When I become clear that this person has borderline, I review the confidentiality stuff. And I say I have to report it if it seems to be credible. So if you're going to talk about abuse, you need to be very clear that this person could be reported. A lot of times that surprisingly they take that in and make adjustments. The abuse usually doesn't come out in the first couple of sessions. And by then I've gotten a pretty good read of how much reality they are in. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but you can see when it's really real. I don't know how to explain how I know. I just do. Sorry, can't be more specific with that one. Anyway, Lynn, you had a question?
I'm sorry about being muted. What I noticed when you talked about and demonstrated your talking to them, being curious, not that type of confrontation with the soft. I noticed that you were all in your communication. It was clear that you were available to them and still connected to them while you were doing that. And I thought that was a key ingredient.
Yes.
With what you're doing, and I wanted to underline it. You did a really lovely, lovely job with that. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really important to make sure that they still feel like you are on their side. At any point that they feel that you are not on their side, they will end at that moment and never come back. It really is a dance through the minefield. It's pushing just enough, but very gently, and really more through questions, not direct challenges. Direct challenges don't go well. Thanks for observing that. That's a good observation. Yeah. Any other questions? We still have lots of time.
Lee asked you, Chalon, how much of their behavior is genetic versus early trauma?
I'm not sure. What I've observed is that it definitely runs in families. Lots of borderline in one family goes through multiple generations, which says to me that there's got to be a big genetic component. But I suspect there is this is what I think. I think that genetics provides like a switch, like a light switch, and that environment, especially really young, really, really early childhood environment, flips the switch or not. And some people go all the way through and it never happens. I've seen like one family member that has nothing. Lots of like, there's like some borderline behavior, there's some narcissist behavior. These are like children of narcissists and borderlines. And you'll get kind of a mix of the two, but not fully narcissist and not fully borderline. There's just like flavor there. And I think that's the learned behavior versus they don't actually have the disorder, but they have some pieces of it, if that makes sense. Some traits. Yeah, exactly. Traits. That's a really good question. How do you keep yourself grounded? I spend a lot of time reminding myself, this is not about me. They're mad at me because I'm the person that's here. I'm convenient. Also, because I am consistent and on their side always, they can be mad at me. They test it. They always test that especially at the beginning. They test it. And then when they realize that I'm not going to take things personally, I'm not going to fly off the handle, I'm not going to abandon them, then they'll push a little more. They'll push a little more. And I just remind myself, first off, they're not even aware that they're doing it. It's not about me. It has nothing to do with me. It's all their own internal process. And I remind myself how hard that must be for them to always feel like everyone is going to leave them at the drop of a hat, that they could do anything or nothing, and they will still be left. That's a horrible way to feel. And so I just remind myself of that. It's not me and how hard this must be for them. Yes, staying a safe place to test. Yeah, exactly. Connecting to their humanity and keeping my empathy. Yeah. Yeah. There are occasionally people that it's harder to do than others. I have a client who fired me and rehired me every single session for the first 3 or 4 months. That one got tedious. But yeah, and then he explored around to try to see what my opinions were, and he would take the opposite side to try to challenge me on stuff. We did the opposite political stuff. We did opposite religious stuff. It was once I figured out what he was doing, it became really easy because then it was like, oh, I just don't have a firm opinion about anything. and he stopped doing it. But I think that was more him testing to see if I was really going to stay. He's an older man and he'd been through quite a few therapists. So yeah, he talked about being fired as a client multiple times. So yeah. Any other questions?
Do you use many somatic techniques with people with borderline personality disorder? So calming techniques, breathing techniques, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Not a ton. When emotions get really out of hand, when they're really angry, I like to say, okay, why don't we pause for a second and let's take a breath. And because they have trouble being accountable. I say because I'm feeling a little like I'm starting to feel a little upset, and let's calm, let's both calm down. And that actually is really helpful if I can be the one holding that. So yeah, mostly just calming things. I'm not a huge, I have some training in somatics, but not extensive. So yeah. Yes, disorganized attachment, the pushing away, and yeah. Getting rid of people who are good in their life, including the therapist, that's a constant problem. Let's see. The more you give boundaries, the more the behavior escalates. To a point, with the clients that I have that have borderline, I have to be very careful of my own boundaries. I have to maintain, I don't text or return phone calls after hours for them ever. If you, anything you give, any concession you give is not a one-time thing. Somebody with borderline personality disorder, there's no one-time thing. If you give them some space, well, this time I'll go over 10 minutes. Now we're going to go over 10 minutes every single session, and they feel entitled to it. And if you don't do it, it's a huge breach. So you have to stay very consistent. You have to maintain your own boundaries. But like, be soft about it. You don't have to be harsh. I find that anything I do that's harsh it's not helpful. Hard confrontation never works. It always becomes a huge problem. Let's see. Do I ever think they'll graduate therapy? I have yet to see someone progress enough that they could totally give up therapy. I've had them stop therapy with me. And sometimes that's good because clearly we're not making enough progress. The fit isn't always great. And no matter how hard I try, sometimes it just doesn't always work. But not a lot of graduating. Usually they need a lot of support. I haven't seen anyone totally be able to let go. I have had them decrease the number of sessions. I've seen them decrease the acuity. Yeah, but not fully graduate. Yes, teaching emotional regulation is one of the most important parts. The diagnostic connection some clinicians make between borderline personality disorder and chronic PTSD, I sometimes question, not always, but I sometimes question if the chronic PTSD is more about rewriting their history than it is about actually having chronic PTSD. But I'm not sure. So how are borderline traits and borderline diagnoses different? Mostly in intensity. Also, they will have some of the things. They will have, they'll have the emotional volatility. They'll have poor boundaries. Somebody with borderline personality disorder has no boundaries, none. They'll have poor boundaries, but they won't have like their history is good. They're capable of maintaining relationships. They just have like certain things. they only saw really explosive responses to things. So that's how they operate. But they're they don't go back and forth on people are all good or all bad. Their thinking isn't so black and white. They don't do the splitting, things like that. I hope that answers the question. There used to be a strong, you don't know what's wrong, so that's what I think borderline is a legitimate diagnosis. I I think I think it's hard to pin down. I know that when I'm seeing a client for the first time and doing the evaluation, I'm not thinking in terms of criteria for borderline. I'm just feeling how it feels. And somebody with borderline has a particular feel. I can feel it. And I can feel it really right away within a couple of minutes. If I get that feeling, then I start to look for, okay, why am I having that feeling? And then I'll see, oh, there's this and this. And that makes me, it cues me to pay more attention to the historical narrative that they're telling me, and to listen for the black and white thinking. I really go more by how it feels. I don't know if that's helpful to other people. Sorry about that. What do I like working with this population? Yes, Kimberly, it's visceral. Yeah, I feel it. What I like working with this population, a lot of it is it feels very familiar. I like the challenge of trying to be able to get them to make connections that they haven't been able to make. I like when I can see that they're starting to find ways to trust me and then be able to have them spread that out to other people in their lives, point out how these other people around them are more consistent than they think they are. They're actually more trustworthy. I don't know. I was told going through school that borderline, there's very little treatment and very little hope. And I don't find that to actually be the case. I don't know that there's cure, but there's not cure for most things. Most thing is about finding ways of coping and accommodating and teaching them strategies for how to, when they're having this kind of feeling, pause for a second, take a moment and think about what's really going on. Sometimes when it's like their partner, do you really want to throw away this relationship because he made you mad or she made you mad or whatever it is, they made you mad? It doesn't have to be black or white, and the progress is when they start to see that there's some gray, and even just a little gray is great. Let's see. Personal question. Did I have any borderline? Oh, yes. Yeah, lots and lots of borderlines in my family. Yeah, I'm kind of surrounded. And definitely I'm sure that's why I can feel it, and it's so easy. In giving this talk, Jim and I talked about this. I had to find a way to put into words what I do kind of naturally without thinking about it. I had to spend a lot of time thinking about what is it that I do? How do I do that? How do I know? Because because I just did it. So yeah, definitely surrounded by borderlines. Lorraine found that borderlines don't stay out of hospitals when they have found a place. Sometimes that's sometimes the case, although what I'm hearing is the psych hospitals are getting so terrible that clients don't want to be there. And so they want to get out as soon as possible. And the threat of going back is frequently all that's required to keep them out. Sometimes they do go back. Yeah. I don't usually tell them that they have a borderline personality disorder diagnosis. I don't actually put it in their chart because I've been when I worked through agencies and DMH doesn't pay for treating borderline personality disorder, so you put it in as something else. And so I've just always kept that. There are clients when I feel like they've reached an ability to understand it, then I start talking about how these are patterns that they have. I try not to say you have borderline personality disorder, but I don't lie if they ask me directly. Yeah, I'll tell them. But I do start talking about things like splitting because that's helpful to them if they see that pattern. But we have to build a lot of trust first, and that it's very slow going because they are so distrustful, and they're usually the first to pull the plug on a relationship if they think it's going bad. They're gonna bail out because they don't want to be bailed out on.
Mitson raised her hand. Mitson, you have a question?
Yeah, just on that thought about telling them about their diagnosis. I've seen more open discussion about having a borderline diagnosis or suspecting that folks may be borderline among Gen Z or younger millennials. So I was wondering if with that cohort, the nature of those discussions might be different if in your experience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a lot more awareness in early millennials, people in their 20s and below. But I don't see anybody. I don't think I have anybody below 22. But yeah, if they're younger, we can talk about it because they don't feel the stigma. If I were to say that to somebody who's in their 40s or 50s, oh, they feel huge stigma about it. So yeah, but over time I can get them to trust enough in me that we can talk about how this seems like there might be a little bit of this going on. Lots of space for it to not be true so that they feel safe. It's all about soft. Diagnosis changing over time based on, well, I don't chart the borderline diagnosis, and as we get, it usually goes in as depression or anxiety because that's usually what brings them in anyway, and that will maybe improve, maybe not. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So that'll change. I try to keep the charting consistent, but I don't tend to go back and rewrite things.
Joe raised his hand. Joe, do you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to say I worked for 17 years in psychiatric hospitals, and the majority, actually, it's really funny because in the private practice that I worked, nonprofit that I worked at simultaneously, my very first personal client was borderline. It was baptism by fire. But at the hospital, it was really interesting because most of the people that I treated that were borderline personality disorder had long documented histories of being told and treated for borderline personality disorder. So it was not news for them. They usually would, and even in my private practice, quite often by the first or second session, they'll, divulge that, they've been getting treated for borderline personality for years and years and years. So it's interesting, the different kind of like experiences that we have with them.
Yeah,
Yeah, if I could jump on that too, and I work at an agency, and I've had folks who have been diagnosed with borderline personality or who've been through a few rotations of DBT or in different DBT programs. So they're more open to discussing it. It's not like the being hit over the head with this huge stigmatizing thing.
We're going to need to wrap up now. It's 1:29. So
well, thank you for listening. Happy to answer any follow-up questions. Feel free to email me. It's Chalon at chalonlcsw.com. So
Thank you,
Chalon,
Shalon.
thank you so much.
Very helpful.